I'm thrilled that we are able to speak to Vicki Finlay today. At 17, Vicki's daughter Margaret came out as gay, and later, also at the age of 17, her son Sam came out as transgender. We're going to talk about how both of them revealed their authentic self to Vicki during this interview. And we're also going to understand how we have to give time for the parents to understand, to fully accept, and possibly to grieve. Vicki understands this, and I'm looking forward to this conversation because she's going to give us insight to the parents' viewpoints and the parents' thoughts, as well as a parent who has jumped in, has become very kick-ass, and has done a lot in central Alberta. We're going to be introducing you to Vicki in just a few moments. Before then, though, as always, I want to acknowledge the fact that I am doing this episode from Treaty 6 territory, the traditional meeting grounds and gathering place and traveling route to the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. We acknowledge all of the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. I am, like many of you, on this journey to understand, to be open, and to listen. And with those words that I always try to say at the beginning of every episode, I hope you join me in doing that as well. On Thursday, we have a very special guest. His name Brad is a mystery writer, a gay mystery writer who has a series of books with a continuing character. He is also a podcast host where he interviews many LGBTQ plus mystery, science fiction, and suspense authors. That's not going to be at 7 Thursday. That will be a special noon time. So make sure that you check in with us noon on Thursday, July 15th, to have a conversation. This introduction is always weird because I know that there are things that I'm supposed to say. My friend Dwayne always says, if you like the content, please be sure to subscribe on YouTube as well as the other channels. And if you're listening to us through the audio form, especially Apple Podcasts, please make sure that you leave a rating and a review, because those ratings and reviews helps push the algorithm. And as we know, we need to make sure that our LGBTQ plus youth voices are put out there at all times. Let's get to today's guest. Vicki Finlay is coming to us from Red Deer. Let's bring her to the screen. Hello, my dear. Welcome to Tales of the LGBTQ plus.
How are you? I'm honored to be here.
Hey, I think it goes the other way here. We were put together by a mutual friend, Corey King, in central Alberta, and I'm thrilled that we're finally able to come together and have this conversation because we haven't heard from the parent point of view. We've always come from somebody who is authentic self within the LGBTQ plus community. So it's great to have you here tonight.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Douglas.
We do have a few live listeners here, and I just want to tell all of you that we do have a comment section where you can leave comments, give us questions, and we'll make sure that we include that whenever possible. So, Vicki, I've looked at your story and I've looked at information about you. Before your children came out to you, what was your connection with the LGBTQ community, or at least what was your knowledge?
Wow. I've been doing some thinking about this because I anticipated this question. And ironically, when my children were babies, I used to rush to get them in bed. I don't remember what night it was, to watch my very favorite show, Queer as Folk, on TV. After watching the British series, I, had to watch the American series, and I was quite enamored with the characters, and I was obsessed with Deb, the mom. So I don't know. I think somewhere down deep inside, I knew that it was something that was going to be a part of my life. I've always been fascinated with the culture, with the people, and ironically, it is something that is part of my life. So that's probably about all the information that I knew. I don't even think my husband knew I watched the show. I don't know if he would have understood my little guilty pleasure back then. He would now, but so that's pretty much my, Brian and Michael were my experience of gay men, and yeah. So
Yes. I can tell you right now, I have always been the Michael. That is me to a T, I believe.
oh,
And also with Queer as Folk, that was the only time on Showcase when we would get an LGBTQ plus movie afterwards, and there was always that, ooh, what's it going to be? And or we had Oz, one of the two, and that was very queer friendly for a
right,
prison show. But that's a
right. Oh
different
yeah, another one of
topic
my
itself.
favorites.
See, you were meant, and you've been double blessed with having two children part of the rainbow community.
I have
For,
been, yes.
yeah, so you're based in Red Deer, Alberta, Canada. So approximately 100,000 people. Has Red Deer always been your base, or did you grow up somewhere else?
Well, I was born and raised in central Alberta. I was born in Camrose, lived most of my my adolescent years in Wetaskiwin. I went to high school in Calgary, met my husband, had my babies. We lived briefly in Brooks, and we've been here in Red Deer now for 15 years. So I'm right around where I grew up, and where I'm used to being. I love central Alberta. And I think Red Deer is a really great place to live and to raise our kids. They went to school here from kindergarten to grade 12, and yeah, we call Red Deer our home now.
Yeah, see, I grew up in the Stettler area, Botha, Gadsby, and I grew up from those small villages and went to Red Deer College in the early '90s, and we had a spot called the Other Place where we could go at times, but I never found Red Deer to be a gay, queer friendly city. It's very different now with what's been taking place and Central Alberta Pride, but I never felt that I could be my authentic self when I was going through those college years. I'm using that as kind of an example because it's very different now. And so, can you talk about how Red Deer, as being the central point between Edmonton and Calgary, with how it has changed over the last 15 years since you've arrived?
Wow. Well, first of all, Red Deer has grown considerably since we moved here. And we have come to be our own city, where when we first moved here, you're stuck between Calgary and Edmonton, and you needed to go to either Calgary or Edmonton for certain services or whatever. And it did get to the point, in the past years where Red Deer was pretty much completely on their own. You didn't really need to go to the city anymore. We have so many small towns around Red Deer as well. So we are different than most small cities in the fact that a lot of people work, shop, eat in Red Deer that don't necessarily live in Red Deer. So we have the resources, the different facilities of a larger city than we would necessarily if we were just 100,000 people. So, Red Deer has definitely grown and changed in the last couple of years, for sure.
Yeah, it's fantastic to see. I know when
Yeah.
I go to visit family and friends, the air is different. I know for myself, I can relax the shoulders. And if I wanted to, I may be able to hold my husband's hand. Maybe I'm getting there, but that small town boy is still within me talking. So I'm thrilled when I'm in Red Deer and I see the younger me's being able to do that.
Yeah.
It's thrilling to see. So let's get to the beginning of your story. Can you describe the day when your first child left you a letter where she announced her authentic self? What was taking place that day?
Well, it was like any other day. I had gotten up and went to the coffee machine to put on a pot of coffee. I believe that my husband was still in bed, and I'm not sure why, because he 99 out of 100 days gets up earlier than I do, but for whatever reason, he was still in bed. And I found a note sitting on the coffee machine, and I rushed to read it. And when I opened the note, and read the first couple of words that were on the note, I immediately had two thoughts in my head. First one was, oh, thank you, God, this is not a suicide note. And the second one was, this could be the most important day of her life, so you better not screw it up. And actually, I used, in my mind, I thought the F word instead.
Oh, you can
And
swear if you
yeah,
want.
yeah, I better not fuck it up, is what I thought
Yeah.
to myself. And on that note, it said, basically, Mom and Dad, I just want to let you know that I'm a lesbian. I don't want you to make a big deal about this. I hope nothing changes, but this is who I am. Well, after I read the note, I ran into the room and I said, look what I just found, to my husband. And he opened the note and he read it, and we looked at each other and we're like, oh boy, what do we do now? Right. And, it was very unexpected in ways. And then in other ways, it wasn't. In other ways, it was the answer to a question that I had had in my mind before. But even though I had considered it, it still was quite a shock when I read the note.
They always mention that a mom knows deep down in their soul, they know when something is up, quote unquote. I do have to go back a little because you said you rushed to the note and it was a suicide note, or it was something else.
Right.
So obviously at this time, there was something up. The mood has changed within the household with your daughter, and there had to have been something that was worrying to you to have this initial thought.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because I don't know if I've ever really thought about that, but she was 17 years old. She was awful. She had turned into a monster. And she wasn't happy. We weren't seeing eye to eye. There was something going on. And so I think that's why that initial thought, because I think it could have been that. And I will never forget how lucky I am that it wasn't, because so many people don't get a second chance. And I did get a second chance with that letter, and reading it saying, everything's okay. I'm in my bed asleep, but just to let you know, I'm not who you think I am. And that's probably why there was a sense of relief after reading it, was because now I understood what was in the air, what was going on, what maybe was the problem that she was dealing with that we couldn't see eye to eye about. So yeah, there was obviously something going on, but as parents know with 17-year-olds, that's usually the time in which there's something up.
Yeah. When, with the word lesbian being put out there into the household, you're having this conversation with your husband, is sleeping, probably just in a fetal position in bed, waiting to hear you come through the doors. What was the plan of attack from then? Did you give space, or was it, let's open the door and let's talk about it now?
Well, she had to go to school that day, and I wanted to appreciate one of the requests that she had in the letter, and that was not to make a big deal about it. So I thought, this is going to take more time than we have. So I called her into the room, and I believe I suggested if she wanted to stay home that day and just talk and just, because I had a lot of questions. And I think she did actually stay home that day. Her dad went to work after telling her that everything was okay, that he loved her very much, and that nothing was going to change. And we laid in bed for a while, her allowing me to ask questions, extremely stupid questions, extremely naive questions. I had never really, I didn't know what to ask. I didn't know what not to ask. I had a lot of different things going through my mind, and she gave me the opportunity to ask her as many questions as I wanted to, and that's how we started the process of her coming out.
Yeah. So she came out to both of you. Was it a slow outing for herself to friends and family, or was it all, I'm out of the closet, here we are, strap in, mom and dad, we're going for a ride?
Well, it was slow because apparently this was something she had been thinking about and talking about and wondering about for at least a couple of years prior to. And she had a very, very close relationship with her sibling, and was able to talk to them about this as well. So we weren't the first to find out, and it was a process that she had gone through prior to on her own to get to the point where she was able to tell us. Typically, often someone will go through some different ideas of what they are, and apparently originally she thought that she liked boys or that she was bisexual, and then it took her a while to come to where she was able to say to us that she felt she was a lesbian. And as wonderful as I make it sound, we weren't like, when she told us, we were receptive and we were open to listen, but we weren't like, oh, yay, let's have a party. My daughter just told us she was a lesbian. So, there was shock. There was discomfort. There was any imaginable thing you can think of, denial, all of the different feelings were coming up over the next days and weeks that followed this first day. And as far as coming out to the rest of the family, etc., well, I listened to her for one day and didn't make a big deal about it, but she knows me well enough to know that I make a big deal about everything. So I think within a couple of weeks, we found ourselves at our very first Pride in Edmonton with matching T-shirts and trying to figure out what it was all about, because as a family, we had no experience other than my years of watching Queer as Folk to know what to do or what was expected of us or how to handle this. So we just kind of dove right in. And
Yeah, and with Queer as Folk, there wasn't really a lesbian component to it other than the married couple, and they were just side characters. Unfortunately for the lesbian community, there aren't a lot of representation in TVs, movies. There's shows like The L Word, but those are specialty channels, and it was hard to find. So I
yeah,
can
I
definitely
watched the L
understand.
Word as well.
I would imagine you've got very favorite characters from that as well.
I do. But again, there wasn't young characters, there wasn't young women still living at home. These were women that had been openly lesbian for a while and were living their lives. So there was really nothing that I had to compare to, when my 17-year-old daughter told me, and I had no friends that had lesbian daughters. I didn't know really anybody that was in this position that we had found ourselves in. And I went through a mourning process in a way, as much as I was willing to accept it and show her that our family was going to circle around her. I remember being among some friends right after I found out, and them talking about their daughters or their sons having a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and doing normal, what they perceive as normal young people heterosexual activities, and was astounded to find out that you just couldn't talk about, oh yeah, they'd say, well, how's Margaret doing? Does she have a boyfriend? And I'd mention, she's a lesbian. And the conversation would change all of a sudden from, just a regular conversation about kids and to a sexual conversation somehow, because now I'm talking about her sexuality, where they were talking about their kids' sexuality prior to that, but it's heterosexual, so that was okay. But as soon as I mentioned that Margaret had come out as a lesbian, the tone would change. So, it took a while to get comfortable with that, and be able to voice it without feeling strange and without, feeling uncomfortable with the tone in the room and how people were going to react. But I looked at my husband and I said, I just, what? Like, I can't believe this. I think my head's going to explode. I can't take this. And I started to cry. And I said, I pretty much just froze. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to think. I just thought, I just got used to the fact that my daughter's life was going to look different than it than we thought. And all of a sudden, my youngest daughter is now telling me that she's a boy. And that's not something that I think you can ever be prepared for, maybe unless it happened to you twice. Even with the experience that we had with our oldest, this was not comparable. It wasn't something that I thought was even close to being the same. I realized immediately what a big deal this was and how major it would be and would be. And I remember my husband, and you know, I tend to get a lot of gratitude and a lot of press, I guess, about my attitude towards my children and how accepting I am to the community and the things that I do for the community. But I want everyone to know that without a loving husband and father, who not everyone is lucky enough to have, we wouldn't be doing this. Well, I think we could have done it. I think I could have done it by myself, but that would have been another layer of difficulty if my husband wasn't the man that I thought he was, and he ended up rejecting our children, and then we would have been divorced, and we would be doing this. I would be doing this without his support. So I just want to give a shout out to Matt, who is a great dad, and I believe on that morning said to me, "Don't worry, we'll figure this out together." And we started to do that. Now, the process was much more difficult and much longer in ways. And then in ways it was not as difficult, I think, because we had already experienced some of it with our daughter, with our oldest child. But finding out that your daughter is not a girl and never was a girl was a pretty big shock. And I think, you know, it's fairly cliche to compare it to a death. I don't really think of it as a death. I think of it more of a continuation of I don't know. I don't feel like I lost my daughter in order to have a son. I feel that my child, who was previously presenting as a girl, was always a boy, and I now know it. I don't know if that makes sense, but I reacted much to it like a death. I mourned. I went through denial. I went through anger. A lot of different feelings happened. Well, first of all, I had never met another family that had more than one queer child, because I was new to the community. I only knew a little bit. I knew about a lesbian. That was it. I didn't know about everybody else. I was handling the lesbian thing and doing just fine. And this opened a door of a whole nother thing. And I knew nobody that had more than one child that had come out. So it wasn't, at first, I felt tremendously guilty. Like, what had I done? You know, what did I do when I was pregnant? Did I eat the wrong things? Did I do the wrong things? You know, I even thought people are going to laugh at me. They're going to point at me and say, "What did you do?" Right? And so I thought I was starting to be very disappointed in myself and very kind of ashamed. Like, what did I do to cause this? So fortunately, I met somebody fairly quickly after I found out about our son, Sam. And it was someone that the kids had known from school. And they were kind enough to tell me in conversation that they were gay and that their sibling was genderqueer. And I said to them, "Wow, you mean that happened? That, you know, that happens? I didn't know that. Like, I didn't realize that there was other people other families that have experienced this." And so I owe a lot to that kid for telling me that, because it opened my eyes to start experiencing the fact that it's just as easy to have two queer children as it is to have two heterosexual children. And since then, I've met many families, some with 5 kids and 3 of them are queer, some with 3 kids and 2 of them are queer, some with 4 kids and all of them are queer. And I always now say to them, well, anybody can have straight kids, but back then I thought that it must have been something that I did wrong. And I imagine that's a feeling that a lot of parents go through, is that, what did they do wrong? But
Yeah, absolutely.
And
I have two groups of friends who've had twins. In fact, the parents had 2 sets of twins. All 4 of them are part of the rainbow community. So there's something to do with the genetics that come with that, for sure.
oh, definitely. But isn't that ironic that up until 2-3 years ago, I didn't know that existed? I mean, I was living what I thought was a normal, everyday, average life. I had been with the same guy since I was 18 years old. We had 2 lovely little girls. We were raising them as normal, or as average as we thought we could. I always remember saying, I don't want them to be special. I just want them to be average. I just want them to be, average and fit in and have a nice life. And until, this happened in my family, I wasn't aware that it happened in other families. So I don't know if it's that people hadn't talked about it, if they weren't talking about it, or if I just wasn't listening. If I didn't, if I wasn't out there, meeting the people. But I think part of it was that I just had absolutely no connection to the LGBT community, because I guess, I was supportive of them, or I thought I was. I thought, oh yeah, it's fine. I don't mind if people are gay. I don't care what people do in their own bedrooms. But I had never really found, and I watched, my LGBTQ friendly TV shows, but I had never really experienced real people, real families that had kids, that were going through these struggles. And so I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if it was that I wasn't listening or if people weren't talking about it, but I think it probably was a little bit of both.
So you talked a lot about how after Sam described his true self, his authenticity to you, that it was a lot of you feeling this. This is the self-pity. This is the, oh my gosh, what did I do? When did that switch happen for you? Was there something that caused you to kind of go, whoa, I've got to stop making this about me and what everybody would possibly think about me, and I've got to be here for Sam and my oldest child as well? Was there a specific moment?
I don't know. It wasn't too far along in the process. It was in the first couple of weeks. And the reason why I mentioned this is because I want people to know that you can have a relationship with God and you can be LGBTQ. And God is a strength in my life. And I just distinctly remember God, talking to me, giving me, putting something in my head, whatever you want to call it, and saying, look, Vic, this is not about you. Stop feeling sorry for yourself. This is not a punishment. If anything, this is a blessing. And I have chosen you and your husband to have these children because I know that you can do it. And as clear as if he was sitting beside me, that's the message that I received. And, you know, I'm not super religious. I don't go to church. I find myself more of a spiritual person, but my connection with God was very strong, is very strong. And I heard that from him. And almost immediately, I started looking at it differently. I still was experiencing some of the grief, I guess, some of the discomfort, some of the worry, some of the questions. But all of a sudden, I stopped feeling sorry for myself. I stopped looking at this like it was about me or something that I did. I started looking at it as that it was, you know, him, it was about him, and that our purpose in it was to be good parents and to be supportive, and that they were, you know, they're a blessing that we were given. And that's how I've looked at it ever since, is that, you know, people say, be careful, you know, God only gives you what you can handle. Well, I'm really glad, and I would never go back. I am so glad that God gave us these children. I am so glad that they're both queer. I am so glad that he felt that we could handle them, because it has absolutely changed my life, and I wouldn't change it back.
Yeah.
And
How
sorry.
important how important has it been for Sam for you to use the correct pronouns? I noticed that you've mentioned he, him, but you've also said they and them during this
Right.
conversation. So how important has it been for Sam for you to use these correct pronouns?
It's been very important. And that was one of the first things that we decided that we were going to do for him. So I just want to clarify. My child was gendered female at birth, and is now living his true, authentic self as a male. So I hesitate to refer to him as she when I'm referring to who he used to be. For a long time, I did. I referred to him after he came out as a him and before he came out as a she. And he was okay with that. I said, you know, this is how I have, you know, given myself the ability to keep this straight. Excuse the pun. Is to call you a girl before and call you a boy now. But so that was one of the first things that we did, is as a family, we started calling him, calling, you know, referring to him as a male, and doing what you call, you know, social transition, where he started, you know, dressing as a male and being called a male. And it was very important, even though he was able to understand that we had had 17 years of calling him a girl and referring to him as a girl and knowing him as a girl, that it was going to take some time for us, and that he needed to, you know, be patient, because it wasn't going to be something we could do overnight. So, you know, we slowly started using the new pronouns, and it was difficult. It was difficult, and I am very grateful, because Sam was born, you know, it's not kosher to ask him what his dead name is, but he was born Samantha, and was kind enough to his mom not to change his name to Herbert, but to change his name to Sam, so that I didn't have to learn a new name. So, you know, we didn't have that part, which would have been another layer of learning and of getting used to calling him a different name. But it was very difficult, and it was very important to him. It was very hurtful to him when people would call him by the wrong pronouns, when he would be called a girl. Ironically, it's much less hurtful to him now. He's okay with it now. But back at the very beginning, it was like sticking a knife into him every time you would use the wrong pronoun. Where now I think it's because he's come so far, and he's come so far in his transition, that he is okay if he's misgendered. It doesn't hurt him the way that it used to.
With the Central Alberta resources, what resources were available to you when Sam said who he is? Was it quick to find that support, or was it more difficult?
Well, I think if we go back to when my daughter came out, I did the Deb thing. Michael's mom, Deb, from Queer as Folk, and I looked up PFLAG because it was the only thing I knew. And ironically, I think I have a little Deb in me, which it's an honor to say that I have a little bit of Deb, and that I modeled myself as a parent a little bit after Deb. So I looked up PFLAG, and I briefly went to a PFLAG meeting, met a couple people, and that was part of that, learning that. Then I was able to meet some people from CAPS, which is Central Alberta Pride Society. Now, when my son came out as transgender, again, I just started Googling, and I found a support group here in Red Deer that was meeting. It was called Raising Rainbows, which was a mother or parent group that got together to support each other, that had children, transgender or non-binary children. And then I managed to get in touch with TANIS, which is the Transgender and Non-Binary AIDS Society. So, I had to look, but as soon as I started looking, I was finding some of these different connections. And, it was just kind of like talking to this person, and they'd suggest talking to this person and that person. Quite happily, Red Deer did have some resources that I could access fairly immediately. And, and then that's where I heard about going to the gender clinic, or what doctors I should be speaking to, etc. So, because once, people say, well, what happens if he changes his mind, or what happens if, this is just a phase, or whatever. It didn't take me long to realize that it wasn't a phase that my son was going through. When I saw the absolute difference in him once he came out, I remember booking, actually, one of the first things I did was book a counseling session for our family, or for the three of us, to go to discuss the fact that he had just told us he was transgender. And the purpose of that counseling session, I believe, was that I wanted to ask the psychologist if my son was transgender or not, because I didn't know. I wanted him to confirm it for me. But prior to going to that appointment, I had already seen my son change so much with his revelation, and change and become so happy and so free, that I realized before I saw the doctor, that indeed he was transgender. So that actually became a totally different session than I had previously expected it to be, because I had some certainty in my mind that it was true. And I remember one of the things that the gender specialists told us when the first time we went to see them was, they said, when parents ask me what gender their child is, I turn and I say, go ask your child, because they know. And, you know, people say, well, they're too young to know, or they may be in a phase, or they might be making a mistake, or what if they change their mind? Well, yeah, sometimes they do change their mind, but it's usually somewhere in the, you know, they might change their mind because they think they're non-binary, and then they realize that they're actually transgender, or vice versa, or something like that. But it's usually somewhere in that range of feelings. So when somebody feels that their gender isn't correct, they normally just don't one day think they're transgender, the next day they don't think they're transgender. You know, they might go through some different ideas. Like my son thought that he was non-binary. He thought, you know, first he thought it was his sexuality. He thought he was a lesbian. He thought he was bisexual. He thought he was gender queer. And then he realized that it really was that he was a boy. And I often joke and say, the day that he said to me, when we asked him, what does being a boy look like to you? And he said, well, I want to be big and hairy. And I looked at him and I said, well, there you go. I said, now I have no doubts you're a boy, because there's no girl in this world that would wish to be big and hairy. So I joke with him now, because he indeed is big and hairy. So
you have a bear or a
I
cub?
do have a bear. I do. It's amazing what a few years on testosterone can do.
Welcome. The bears are friendly.
Yeah.
Just give us money. That's all that we need sometimes. Hey, you've talked a little bit about TANF itself, and you are part of the board, is my understanding. So what is the purpose? What is the goal for TANF today and moving forward in the future?
Well, you know, I wasn't on the board when TANF was formed. It originally came from the need, or the perceived need by the transgender community to have better representation of their needs in Red Deer. We had Central Alberta Pride, but they felt that that focus was more on the, you know, lesbian, gay, bisexual, pansexual community, and that the representation, because, you know, like I explained before, your sexuality and your gender are two greatly different things, and they have a different degree of, they have different needs, they have different different problems that might be might arise from being, you know, from being transgender or non-binary, as opposed to your sexuality. So they felt that they needed more of a representation. So that's how TANF was formed, was to make sure that the trans and non-binary community in Red Deer was being better served. With that, they have group counseling. They've had education for, you know, they go out into the community and they educate people about the difference between your gender and your sexuality, the difference, you know, with being transgender and non-binary in today's world. They've, you know, introduced Red Deer to the notion that there are people out there that aren't cisgender, and that they have introduced those people to the community. They have brought in support to those in the community. to a degree that I think that it's easier to be transgender in Red Deer, to be non-binary in Red Deer, than it ever was before. You know, even in the last couple of years, I've seen that change happen. And it's because of organizations like TANIS, and the people in the community, you know, that are willing to step up and show their faces and say, you know, we really would like to pass, but we don't need to pass anymore. We are proud to be transgender. We are proud to be non-binary. We're proud to say that we are those things because they feel comfortable, they feel supported, they feel that they have a community surrounding them, have support from organizations like TANIS, and that it's okay in 2021 to express your gender and not be scared, and to be your true self and not to be scared walking up and down the streets. And, you know, I imagine that, you know, I am not transgender, so I would never want to say how it feels to be transgender or to assume their feeling of safety or of not being safe. But I do know what it's like to have a person who you love more than your own self, more than, you know, that I live for and that I would die for. Mm-hmm. To have that person be transgender. I know what it's like to see the pain. I know what it's like to see the happiness when they become themselves. You know, I know what it's like to be there every step of the way. Even though I don't know what it's like to be him, I know what it's like to be his mom, and to have raised him, and, you know, to have raised a girl that grew up to be a man, and what an amazing man he is. And part of it is because of how he was raised, I believe. I believe that not only was I given a gift from God, but he was given a gift from God. I believe that being transgender is a gift, and that if, you know, that he was given the gift of being able to see what it's like not only to be a man, but to understand what it's like to be a woman as well. And because of that, I think he's an awfully amazing, outstanding man who has the ability to, he wasn't raised with the restrictions that a heterosexual cisgendered man is raised with. He has the ability to see things from a different perspective, and that makes him a really amazing person. You know, regardless of his gender, he is a great human being. And I think that, yeah, I don't even remember what your question was now, to be honest, but
you're doing
whatever
well,
I just
Mom.
said,
You're doing well.
You know, I just want to make sure that people realize that I'm not talking as if I have any experience being transgender, but I think being a parent, especially a mother of a transgender child, your perspective is very different, but it's very unique. I know what it's like to, you know, to raise a girl that grew up to be a man who now has a different view of the world, and is freer because of it. You know, and that's my unique perspective. So,
well, let's make sure that our audio audience gets this information as well. We've been talking about TANIS, which is Transgender and Non-Binary Aid Society. Their website is www.tanis.org. So if you are in Central Alberta and you have more questions, perhaps you've had a conversation with your child, you're seeking resources, definitely go to this website. Vicki is part of this organization as well. And after listening to her, you know absolutely that you can trust the information that you're going to receive. I know for myself, up until about 10 years ago, I could maybe count on one hand or maybe even one finger somebody who I knew was transgender. And I don't know what's happened in the last 10 years with society, the world, with understanding an explosion, or here we are now going to be ourselves, our authentic selves. And for people who are new to Tales of the LGBTQ plus, I offer you the opportunity to go back and listen to a few of our previous conversations. Emmett Michael is an Edmonton singer-songwriter who was raised within the church, and he has just released a new album with a fantastic first single called God-Shaped Hole. Please take a listen as he talks about going through the drugs, going through the alcoholism, going to rehab, finding himself. Well, this past year, he's now engaged to be married. He's living his true self. And for people also new, I offer you 3 weeks of what I call the ultimate love story. Karen and Pam Hoffman. Karen talks about meeting Pam on the day of JFK's assassination when she was in grade 10, living life as a presentable boy, meeting this young girl in grade 9. They've known each other for 60 years, married for 53 years, and Karen has been her authentic self for the last 20 years. And so please go back to those interviews because Karen has her own episode. Pam has her own episode where she talks about how one day she knew that she would have to become a lesbian, put in quotation marks. And then finally, that episode when the two of them were together. Again, it's the ultimate love story. I should also mention here that you and I came in contact with each other through a friend of ours, Corey King, who is part of the Central Alberta Pride Society. And I want to put some of their information here as well for everybody. The Central Alberta Pride Society is found at www.centralalbertapride.ca. If you go to their website today, it says that more information is on its way. Well, we can tell you that there will be an announcement next week when it comes to events that are going to be taking place in Red Deer between the dates of August 8th and August 14th of this year. Perhaps we can get Corey to come on and share some. Well, and why not put a message here from Corey on the board where Corey says, "I have no questions. I just want to wish everyone could have a mom so open and willing to love."
Thank you, Corey.
Yeah, he speaks for many of us. One final question for you. There are people who will be listening to this later on who will be experiencing the same as you. Having a child come to them and say, "Mom, I'm lesbian, I'm gay, bisexual, transgender, asexual, and so many more." What advice do you give to those parents who are listening today?
Well, I always say that there's not a right way of handling a coming out, but there's definitely some wrong ways. When your child comes to you, and if your child comes to you and tells you one of these things, you need to listen, first of all, before you react. You need to take time to hear what they said before you say anything, because let me tell you, you cannot take things back once they've been said. So try not to react immediately. Try to take a breath. Try to absorb what they've just told you and think to yourself, they didn't actually have to tell you that. They could have chosen not to tell you. They could have chosen to hurt themselves. They could have chosen to hide it from you even longer. They could have chosen to do something just absolutely tragic. But instead, it took a lot of courage and probably a lot of time for them to get the strength to tell you what they just told you. So don't belittle it. Don't put it to the side. Don't ignore what they've said, but don't react right away, because you can't take back something that has been said. And just realize that things will be different, and they may not look the same as they did before, but your child is the exact same child they were 5 minutes before that. The way you felt about them, the way you loved them, the way you said that you would protect them 5 minutes before they told you that, they're still that child. No matter what they just told you, they're still your child, and they're still the person that they've always been. And so don't, don't think that the change is going to be bad change, because it's not. Yeah, things will change and your life will look different and their lives might look different, but they're going to look, it's going to be better. It's going to allow them to be the people that they're supposed to be. So support them. Tell them that you need some time. Tell them that you need them to be patient with you, that this is not going to be something that you're going to be able to absorb right immediately and be okay with, that it's something that is going to take some time. And that if they're willing to give you time, you're willing to try. You're willing to put the effort in to understand what it is that they're saying to you, to become more aware of what they, what needs to be done in order to support them. So ask a lot of questions. We have this amazing thing called the internet, and you can ask it just about any question. There's people that are willing to talk to you. There's people that are willing to share and answer your questions. Your child, give them the opportunity to explain to you, what they've just told you and what it means to them. But just be open and supportive. Remember the way that you felt when your child was little and you promised them that you loved them unconditionally and that you'd never let anybody hurt them. And that no matter what they did, you'd always be their mom or their dad, and you'd always be there to love them. And then ask yourself, what changed? Why does what they just told you change that? It doesn't, and it shouldn't. Prove to them that you love them unconditionally. This is the condition, and prove to them that you were telling them the truth, that that you would always be there for them, because this is when they need you the most. And the damage that you can do to your relationship with them if you don't be careful could be, they're going to remember it always. And I tell you, I would rather, your child's telling you as opposed to not telling you and maybe never giving you the opportunity to know them truly, it's a gift, and they're giving you a gift. And I think that once you realize that it happens in other families, once people talk about it, and see, that's why I talk about it, Douglas. That's why I, sit here and talk about my family, because I don't want somebody else to think that they're the only family that has more than one queer kid. I want them to know that it happens in families, and that it's a wonderful gift, and that families can flourish, and that it truly is something that I wouldn't change about my family. I think that it has made my family better, and I couldn't love my family more than I do. So I hope that if someone's child comes to them after today, that they will have a better understanding of how to handle it and how to move forward.
Yeah. Amen. That's what a person would say to that is amen. Absolutely. It's been wonderful to be able to talk to you tonight and for you to share your story, because that insight is needed. And there's parents who have struggled or have not. You needed to hear the words that you've said tonight, especially these words here at the end. So thank you very much, and welcome in being part of the Tales of the LGBTQ plus community.
You.
Despite my internet outage halfway through, but we were able to recover. So that was a good thing as well. Thank you again, Vicki.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Oh, my pleasure. And thank you, Corey, once again. To everyone listening to this podcast, please make sure you have these conversations, talk out loud, be open, listen. That's all we can do. On behalf of Vicki, my name is Douglas. Thank you for listening to this episode of Tales of the LGBTQ+, reminding you to be good and always text when you get home. Until next time, everyone.